Hello, and welcome to a different episode of Johnsequitur. I got a guest on today. Go ahead and tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Magee. My friends call me Shagg.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Just anything you want to say.
Well, I'm a diesel mechanic, and I spend a lot of time learning about as much as I possibly can. One of the things that interests me is diseases and horror movies and, stuff like that, which is kind of what I would like to talk about today.
Yeah, you said we want to talk about possible diseases that could wipe everybody out, right?
Well, when I originally contacted you, what I mentioned was the zombie virus in the movie World War II. But it's not so much the zombie virus that I would like to talk about, and not even the Spanish flu virus that's mentioned in the movie World War II, as much as diseases in general that are capable of wiping out people all over the world.
Sort of like outbreak type stuff, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Pandemic level diseases.
All right, well, I'll let you lead the way on this one.
Okay, so I did a little bit of research, and like I said, in the movie World War Z, they did mention the Spanish flu. Some of my notes here say that the Spanish flu was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, which killed approximately one-third of the world population, which between 1918 and 1920 was about 20 to 50 million people. Now, in today's numbers, world population is currently right about 7.5 billion people. If we were to face a pandemic of the level that the Spanish flu had reached between 1918 and 1920, we are talking about a approximate number of about 2.5 billion people being wiped out by a disease that is communicable.
Right, and I don't think it would be a level where human beings couldn't bounce back, but I do know that for most of human history, the population level rose and fell at a pretty even keel. Even with the Spanish flu, it fell quite a bit, but it was still recoverable. Do you think it could get to the point where it wouldn't be recoverable?
Well, that kind of leads me to another bulletin on my notes. Out of the 7.4 billion people in the world, 95% of the world does not have access to health care. And I'm assuming that means the third world countries, Africa, and smaller places like India, India alone has a population of over 1 billion people.
Right. And
yet they don't have access to the health care that we have in America. So these are the places where I would expect to be hit the hardest of communicable diseases. The possibility of bouncing back, absolutely, without a doubt, we could bounce back. But I think it would have a longer lasting effect in today's world than the Spanish flu did in the era of the early 1900s.
Do you think if something like that were to break out in a place like India or Africa or any of these third world countries, that we would be able to contain it before it actually made its way to the U.S.? Because I know that there's been other flus that we were worried about, things like the bird flu and stuff like that never even got here. So would this be another one of those ones that just never made its way here, or do you think it would be capable of getting here before we could contain it?
We could contain it eventually if we found out what the disease was. I was thinking along the lines of, a disease that, for lack of a better term, is silent. One that lays dormant for a while, and you don't realize that you have this disease until it may or may not be too late. The closest analogy I can think of is HIV. This is a disease that we have known about for years now, but when we originally discovered HIV, we found out that it could lay dormant for years before it showed any signs of symptoms. These are the kinds of diseases that I'm talking about. Diseases that may lay dormant for years, and you may not find out about them until it's too late to do anything about them. In which case, how do you quarantine against those diseases?
Yeah, and that could be a case where one wrong mistake, quarantining the wrong people or letting the wrong people out and not quarantining them, just makes the virus worse. How prepared are we for something like this?
As far as quarantining people, I think we have the procedures written down properly, but to actually put them in place immediately, I think we would fail drastically. Look at the Ebola scare we had back in, I think it was 2013 or 2014. We found out about it, and it took us a couple weeks before we even got everything set up and everybody quarantined that needed to be quarantined. So, but as far as the disease traveling from places like India and Africa, today's methods of travel are by far more extensive than they were in 1918 and 1920. Today, the average person can get on a plane and hop on a plane and travel anywhere in the world that they would like to.
Right, and if this disease were to stay dormant, then they wouldn't even know they were carrying it to another country. Yeah.
Exactly. And, it could be a matter of days or weeks or even months, and, it's all over the globe.
So...
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Another bulletin I have written down here is, and this is something that I'm sure we've all heard in health class, but 95% of people don't wash their hands, which is basic hygiene. This stuff like this is something that can be done to further prevent communicable diseases. Think about the flu. We don't even think about it. We blow our nose. We may or may not wash our hands. And then how many people do we shake hands with every day? How many people do we come in contact and talk to? And, things like that. So if we have a disease that is communicable by respiratory or actual physical contact, you're talking about the spread of the disease rather quickly.
And what's also frightening is that things like antibacterial soap, when you are washing your hands, it's leaving the strongest strains of virus left. So even if you are taking the time to wash your hands or whatever, if this strain is strong enough, you're just leaving that behind anyway. So
exactly, and that's another thing that had crossed my mind. Nowadays, we rely heavily on vaccines and antibiotics, and the doctors tell you, take your antibiotics for X number of days, but how many of us actually do that? We don't do that, and then without completing our antibiotic, we tend to allow the virus or bacteria or whatever it may be to grow resistant to the antibiotic we're taking for. So, eventually, in my mind, it occurs to me that relying heavily on vaccines and antibiotics is eventually going to lead to a stronger virus in and of itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, trying to prevent them just makes them harder to prevent. Is there any signs of a virus like that possibly coming into existence that we are just ignoring, or is this just something that's just going to come out of left field, or?
Well, the CDC keeps strains of virus in their labs for scientific research. So I don't think it's going to be a disease that is coming out of left field. I think it's going to be a disease that is already existent, that somehow reoccurs into the world and we're not prepared for anymore. We may have conquered it once, like the Spanish flu. However, due to not having to deal with it, our vaccines and our bodies are not prepared to deal with it anymore. So I think it's going to hit just as hard, but we're not going to be for it.
Right. I know that there have been some diseases that have been nearly wiped out by vaccines, but due to the recent increase in... I'm not saying... I'm trying to put this in a way that makes sense. I'm not saying that all vaccines are bad. I actually think that it's more of a thing where some vaccines are very necessary and some are very unnecessary. But some of the ones that are very necessary are the ones that people who don't want any vaccines are ignoring, which could cause a disease that was almost eliminated to start making its way back into the public.
Absolutely. A polio vaccine, one of the greatest vaccines we've ever come up with. As far as, how often do we really rely on them? in the military, people take vaccines for going overseas and dealing with, places like Africa for diseases that are communicable and highly contagious. But most of the time, those are limited to the military itself. Whereas the average everyday person, is not subject to those vaccines.
Right.
And those people are the ones that would be subject to.
Now, he gave me some statistics afterwards that I guess he forgot to put in there, so I figured I would interject and put him in here now. The CDC ranked 3 types of infections as the worst. The first is respiratory, the second is diarrheal, ugh, and then the third is HIV/AIDS specifically. I've asked this question before. Is nature trying to kill us? Because, if they make a disease that trying to actively reproduce causes you to get sick, I think nature might be sick of us. Okay, this is another statistic that he gave me that I'm going to throw in here. This is some numbers on the prison industry. 2,717 inmates on death row as of May 17th, 2018. There are 1.2 million rapes estimated yearly in the U.S., 42 million child sexual assault abuse survivors in the U.S., and the U.S. homicide rate is 4.6 per 100,000 people. What we're about to dive into next, it's crazy and somewhat a different take on things, which I actually kind of appreciate. So, here you go.
Since we've, efficiently scared people enough, I know that you also wanted to talk about public executions. What exactly in particular?
Well, I believe that public execution is something that needs to be brought back into the world. I think it is a very...
Do you think it's an effective deterrent?
I do. I really do. I believe that if you watch somebody hang in the streets for murder or rape, it's going to be a visual deterrent on a scale that we have not seen in a while. Back in the early 1800s and 1900s, it was nothing to see somebody hang in the streets for something they did wrong.
Yeah, and now, it's kind of a faraway idea that maybe I'll get, murdered, maybe I'll get hung, well, not hung now, but, maybe I'll get a lethal injection, or maybe I'll just sit in jail. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But if you actually visually see, yes, we will hang you, it could give you that little more push to maybe not do it. I agree with that.
Exactly, and I'm not even saying that public execution should be limited to hanging. Utah, for the longest time, had death by firing squad, which is another form of public execution that I believe should be brought back. Again, a visual deterrent. You see somebody shot dead, rather than wait on death row for X number of years, we're going to take you out back, we're going to execute you. I honestly believe that tickets should be sold, and the money raised from the tickets sold should be split and given half to the family, as not... Part is restitution, nothing's going to bring your family back if they were murdered, or nothing is going to reverse you being raped. But it is something to help ease the pain of the situation.
Right.
So, sell tickets to the public execution, give half the money to the family or the victim, and put the rest towards education in crime prevention.
That's an idea I've never actually heard put forward, and I kind of really like that idea. I mean, you look at what happens now. The crime, nothing deters people from doing anything. You're gonna, and to be sitting on death row for some of these people sit there for 15, 20, 25 years, and then they die on death row without ever being executed, or they get 15 appeals, and it's frustrating to know that we're putting money into something like this. Like, we're putting money into keeping people sitting there, and it'd be much more effective.
Absolutely. I believe I read online in my research that the average time to be on death row is anywhere from 10 to 15 years. That's 10 to 15 years of taxpayers paying for meals and board and anything that we don't need to pay for. If you murder somebody, I believe you need to go to the front of the line. And if it's an accidental homicide, I understand that things do happen. However, it needs to be dealt with appropriately. I don't believe you need to die. However, I do believe you need to be punished in a way that is appropriate for the incident.
I think, like, the way that we handle things now with making a decision on what the punishment should be, and not all the time, but most of the time it's appropriate for something like an accidental homicide or something like that. It's the ones that are like, I went out and shot 10 people and now I'm going to sit here for 15 years and wait. That's where I'm like, I agree with you. Get them up front and put them in front of people, and then you're going to have less times where people are going out shooting 15 people.
Exactly, and the school shootings in Santa Fe, the school shootings in Florida, I believe that the case needs to be brought up front now. Don't put it on hold and wait for other cases that are already on the docket. Bring them up front now. Get them in front of a jury now. Decide his fate, and if he is found guilty, take him out and shoot him. Make a public example of him. We will not tolerate this anymore. We will not tolerate the assassination of kids. We will not tolerate murders of upstanding political figures. Send a message that if you commit a crime as heinous as rape or murder, you will be dealt with.
Yeah, I see absolutely no problem with that. In fact, like, I think we waste too much time trying to figure out the reasons that cause these things to happen, and we don't spend enough time just trying to stop it. Just trying to make people know this is not acceptable.
One thing I think we fail to do is everybody wants to point their finger at guns, but how many of these school shootings have been committed by people that were on psychotropic drugs?
Yes.
How many of these people had mental health issues? The school shooting in Florida, it was known for quite a while that this student had problems mentally. He had psychological issues, and the FBI knew about this but failed to act. So not only do I feel like the student should be held accountable, I feel like the government agencies themselves should be held accountable for not doing what was appropriate with the information they had available.
I'll tell you what, the mental health facilities and just the community in general is pretty bad. There's a documentary on Netflix right now about the guy in Erie who tried to rob a bank with a bomb and he blew up. And the whole thing is about the people who possibly put him in that situation. And there was one woman who murdered her boyfriend in the 70s, I think it was. And they decided she was unfit to stand trial, but the mental facility kept spitting her out. Like, they'd put her back in, and they'd kick her back out. And it happened like 4 times, I think, before she finally just was sent back home after murdering her boyfriend, where she proceeded to murder another boyfriend, and then proceeded to get like 3 years there, and all the doctors were like, she's unfit to stand trial. And again, they let her out of the mental health facility. It's like, I don't know, it's like the mental health facilities are just weak. Like they're doing a terrible job of servicing people with mental health issues.
Exactly, and not only the medical or the psychological aspect, but this goes back to the healthcare. You know, how many people have access to healthcare, appropriate healthcare for the problems they have? The student that shot up the school in Florida. I'm not saying that everything could have been corrected with medical attention as psychologically, but I don't believe that he would have done the things that he did had he been seen by a psychologist and given proper medical or psychological treatment, rather. I believe in this country we focus more on making money off of people rather than giving them the appropriate health. I've seen figures, and one thing that just continues to astound me is the fact that a large portion of today's youth is on some kind of psychological drug. We're talking about Adderall or Ritalin or Zoloft or any number of drugs that are for psychological problems. But how many of these kids actually need these drugs? How many kids actually need to take antidepressants?
A massive amount of these kids are being misdiagnosed. A massive amount.
Exactly. And I feel like the pharmaceutical companies are just well, not even like the pharmaceutical companies, but the doctors themselves are getting reimbursed by the pharmaceutical companies to throw pills at these kids and getting reimbursed for dispersing medicines that aren't needed by these children. And these drugs affect people mentally, and we haven't really researched completely how these drugs affect people, and yet we hand them out like they're candy. More often than not, these pills come with side effects that are worse than the condition that they're supposed to be treating. I believe Zoloft has a warning on it that if you experience suicidal thoughts, you should see your doctor. It occurs to me that that would be the original reason for the Zoloft, would it not?
Yes, it would.
So if we're giving people prescription drugs for antidepressants that cause suicidal thoughts that are supposed to be treated by these antidepressants, what good is the pill itself?
I know that in other countries, there are no commercials on their television that show people running through fields while advertising a drug. And the strangest thing about those commercials is that you'll see somebody happily playing with their family while, like, in the background you hear somebody saying, if you experience suicidal thoughts, or if you have a heart condition, or... It's so bizarre to watch when you actually look at them and listen to them.
Exactly. I believe that a lot of the health problems today can be caused by reverting back to eating organic foods, exercising regularly, taking care of yourself naturally rather than rely on chemicals to solve your problems. That's not to say that there aren't pills out there that actually do work and do work effectively, but how many of these pills, again, are being sold just to make the pharmaceutical companies money rather than actually help the people that they're being prescribed? Well, I mean, that's actually about all I have, but I do appreciate you having me on your podcast, so...
Oh yeah, that was fun. I love going all over the place. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, well, absolutely. I hope to be back on soon.
Sure, any topic you want to talk about, it doesn't matter to me, so